Welcome to another episode of Viatorian Voices, where our conversations on the way give witness to the ministry and spirituality of walking with youth and those who go underserved. In this episode, we're going to celebrate the 15 years Father Dan Belanger, CSV, served as pastor of St. George Parish in Bourbonnais, Illinois. Dan professed first vows as a Viatorian in 1996, and he served for several years in youth ministry as a brother. After being ordained a priest in 2007, Dan was eventually appointed as pastor of St. George Parish, where he served from 2009 until this past summer. For much of that time, he was also concurrently the pastor of St. Mary Church in Beaverville, Illinois, and Dan also did a stint as chaplain of Bishop McNamara Catholic Schools for several years. This summer, he moved on to St. Viator Catholic Community in Las Vegas, Nevada, his hometown, where he now serves as parochial vicar and a member of the vocation ministry team. I'm your host, Associate Dan Masterton. After you listen, help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. To begin, I asked Father Dan to take us back to 2009 and recall a bit of what it was like to be appointed pastor at St. George. Enjoy the conversation.
Funny story. Well, I had just come back from Belize, and lo and behold, we're having a regional meeting at Maternity BVM. And so we're all talking, and there was Father Yarno, who was getting up in the ages. Anyways, Father Yarno did something, and he made a comment, and at that point, Tom needed to make a decision. So as we're walking out of the rectory that night, he goes, "Hey, Dan, you want to be the pastor of St. George?" And I kindly said, "Tom, I just came back from the sugar cane fields. I don't think I want to go to the cornfields." And then he explained to me that what was taking place at St. George. And I said, I've never been a pastor. He goes, "Don't worry, you'll do good and we'll support you." So from there, I moved from Arlington Heights of the school, and the rest is history. So now I lived in the cornfields of St. George for 15 years.
Yeah, so what was it like when you first got there, having lived in Nevada, lived in Belize, been around with the military? What was it like to settle into Bourbonnais, Illinois?
Well, it was interesting because I started to live by myself now as a Viatorian, and the farmers are very cautious of who they want to share with and what they want to do. So the first thing I had to do is build a rapport with farmers, especially those kind of individuals that are set in their ways. And me being, shall we say, a little bit more motivated to do things, and with a group of individuals that set in their ways, it started off, shall we just say, with a lot of dialogues and a lot of trust on my part. Me and God were having conversations, so to speak. But eventually, probably a year in, it got to the point where they knew I was going. They had a young priest available to them, as opposed to always just getting one of the shall I say, wisdom figures of my generation and their generation. So they came around, and then what took place after that is kind of interesting because, as you know, I'm a motivator, a mover, and a shaker. I was able to show them things. And after that, they kind of trusted me. In the bigger picture, it was nice as a community, plus with the Viatorian community behind me, because St. George had been a Viatorian parish for so long that it was nice to keep it in the fold, so to speak.
Yeah, there's such a long history of Viatorians serving there as pastors and priests and working with the people of St. George. So how would you describe the community? You kind of got at some of the, agricultural farmer mindset that some of the people bring in, but surely there's kind of a mix of a few different things. What are the people of St. George like, and how was it to work with them over all these years?
Well, one thing I have to point out though is while it's always been an agricultural parish, the unique thing about it though, it was starting to change because what do you call it, the neighborhoods were expanding, the
Yeah.
residential, the track housing. So that started to come in, and what I found is a lot of the families had heard through the grapevine of my unique way of ministering. So I had a lot of families start to move in, but the farmers, their way of looking at life and their faithfulness was always good. So that's what kept that parish going. It's just to see their community and how they were always so solid in the way they preached and what they did and how they came to church every weekend, whether a priest or not. These people they're faithful, and they would support the parish. Especially, it's an example is when the parish burnt down in 1959. It's amazing that same small group of people got together and they rebuilt a church And so that itself shows you the dedication of what the farmers were actually doing. So, but now as I've been traveling, it's primarily probably a third of the agricultural, and the other two-third now is just normal families that come in from other places.
Yeah, I understand that over time the demographics shift a little bit and the character of the area shifts a little bit and you get new mixes of people. But one of the things I think is interesting from afar, again, just not being a parishioner myself, is it seems like there was an appetite to undertake projects that would improve the buildings and grounds, that would bring capacity into the parish community for hosting faith formation and fellowship events, and that the people of the parish really have like a strong sense of accountability for making it a welcoming, robust place. So, like, what was it like to kind of work with the parish on different ideas for stuff and then get together things like this beautiful Querbes Center for Youth Ministry and this media lab that even like the Viatorians of the region use for like Stations of the Cross and things like that. All that stuff is on this tidy little campus in the cornfields. What was that process like to come up with all these ideas and then work with the Viatorian province and region, to work with the local people, to organize manpower and donations and get all these things together?
I think it goes with my creativity and the gifts, the charism of the Viatorians. I kind of melded the two. And what I found out with that type of community is if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
So I kind of use that thing in the cornfield. I just built a church. And so I would get out and do things. The example of the gardens, for example, I just got out and I had two big piles of dirt delivered to the rectory. And everyone's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to make some berms and I want to put some flowers and eventually just improve the grounds." So after about 6 months and they saw the finished product, they were like, "Okay, we'll let you do the rest of the grounds." And so from there, we got statues, we added fountains, we added all the other things that, because my motto was church doesn't just happen inside the building, it's when you step onto the grounds. That's when you have church. So people would start to come just to look at the grounds, and after dialogues, one of the unique characteristics is I remember doing reconciliation out in the yards because people would walk up and they would say, "So where's the pastor?" And I say, "I am, and I'm covered in dirt." And so from that dialogue, it would just be people pour out their hearts to me in the middle of the grounds. And I'm like, you just went to reconciliation. So, it was interesting on that. As far as the Father Querbes Center, our youth program was growing and there was a need. And then the Viatorians were able to provide grants because of the mission. So we invested into the future of the youth. And also prior to COVID, we were lucky to have all the media center in place, the programs and everything. So we were able to adapt with COVID and still come out of it surviving. And even with COVID, we improved it because then we enhanced our media. So with all the other projects, and the other thing, I'm very community orientated. I like groups and I empower people. So I had an awesome parish council, but then I also had an awesome gardening club. I have an awesome art and environment group. I had an awesome, peace and justice. I use that word awesome so many times because as long as the people were able to do stuff and I was just helping them, it was perfect match.
Mm-hmm.
I was present. It's probably more in the old days, the priest would just sit in the rectory. I'm not that style. I'm out getting my hands dirty and playing in the dirt, so to speak.
Yeah, I think of Pope Francis's desire for us to be a church that's dirty and smells like the sheep and is getting its hands dirty. And I think a lot of people who are maybe feeding the hungry or volunteering in homeless shelters, but there's this piece of it too, this very almost like kind of ho hum day in, day out kind of stuff of moving piles of dirt into garden beds and preparing the grounds for a parish festival or a large social event that people can come and join in together. And that is similarly part of that image of church that Francis has put forward and encouraged us to live out. And there you are, hearing confessions and digging garden beds with your parishioners, and both are, equally part of your sense of being a pastor. And so I think that's pretty neat. What about this other part? We have the Querbes Center for Youth Ministry. We have all these media upgrades that helped with catechesis and mass casting. But then also St. George has this great community life with Summerfest and the anniversary festival stuff. And there's this really rich sense of people coming together and celebrating the community they share. What's special about all that at St. George? Like, how did you notice the way it contributed to community life and helped people have this sense of belonging with the church that they love and the faith that they share?
St. George is very family orientated. I mean, this was generational church, so you can see it in the parishioners. You talk about Summerfest or the homecoming. I mean, this goes back, it was the 78th or the 79th Summerfest. So for 79 years, parishioners have been coming together to eat chicken and do things, but also it was funny because the mass before Summerfest, it was like, Father, make this quick. The church is cooking, the chicken is on the grill. So you got to make this mass fast. But they were always faithful in what it was. And the unique thing is people came from all around because the small cities around St. George. And we also got a reputation for the grounds and the number of things we did. So we had people come, from all over the place. I mean, not just the local area. So people would come to St. George because they heard word of mouth. So it's that kind of family, but also it's kind of like, well, what's this little church out in the cornfield doing? Why is everybody going there? And as I tell everybody, the 4 pillars for me of church were the church is first. People don't come to hear about the boiler, the water heater. No, they want church. So I always made sure that we had good liturgy, good homiletics, good welcoming, and also just the good pastoral care of the people that walked in the church.
Yeah.
So that was one of the highlights. It was the mentality of the parish. It's like, no, the church building is primary, number one.
Yeah, so that was kind of my last question about your about 15 years at St. George. Is there any particular story or moment that you find yourself retelling or going back to as people ask about the time you spent there and you think about the people you've met and the events you were a part of? Is there any like particular highlight that you really enjoy sharing?
God, there were so many. It's hard to believe. We were I think the one thing about it was the Art and Environment Club. We got to the point when we decorated the church, we also became family. So it's kind of like the move I made to Las Vegas is I lost part of my family because there was a group of 12 people that we knew everything about it. But when we came to decorate the church, I mean, these people put everything in. And the unique thing about it is we would all get into theological discussions about decorations. I don't know how many, two, it's like we manipulated themes to enhance like Lent. We used the Wizard of Oz one time to enhance how the theology of the Wizard of Oz came about. And, liturgical police, I'd probably go to jail, but the way the community came together and the number of children that wanted to come to church every week, it was just fascinating because it's like we created this environment where the kids would just love to come to church to see what is he going to do next. And so the parents were grateful because in the essence, the kids would sit and listen and just be present to God.
And I think of some of the photos we have of the liturgies that you celebrated for St. George, of the young people like sitting at your feet around the altar, listening to you preach from your seat right in front of the altar. I think of the year that St. George and other partners in the region too hosted an entire Viatorian Youth Congress and opened up the parish for small group discussions and large group talks and sacraments and put great meals together, and was just a great example of hospitality for these young people from Chicagoland and the Las Vegas area who'd probably never seen anything even vaguely like that before, and then just plugged into it for 4 days, thanks to the great, hospitality and community that St. George could offer, like almost like nothing. Like it's just so natural to the people there. So maybe kind of a transition question then. Now you've been out in Las Vegas again for a few months, and you're there as a priest of St. Viator Catholic Community. Is there anything you've noticed about your time in Bourbonnais that informs transitioning into this role there in Vegas? Or is there things that you've started to do in Las Vegas that kind of draw upon your experience the last 15 years as a pastor of those parishes out in Bourbonnais and Bieberville too, actually?
The unique thing about what I'm finding in Las Vegas is I'm going back to my, shall we say, youth ministry mode when I was Brother Dan as opposed to Father Dan. So, because I was a youth minister for how long now? 12 years, 10 or 12 years before I was even ordained. And so just talking to people, and like I'm working in the elementary school here now. So I'm doing the weekday masses and the kids are all sitting there, Catholic education. But it's just going to the classrooms. Like the other day, I had to talk to second graders about First Communion or reconciliation and First Communion. They're squirrels. I forgot, the energy. I mean, you have kids. So when you get a bunch of kids and you're trying to explain something, you have to come down to their level. And as a father, I'm sure you realize it's like, okay, how can I talk to them about the Trinity? Yeah. 2nd-year-old really wants to know about the Trinity. Or even with reconciliation, I always use the analogy of it's kind of like a mirror. You guys all look in the mirror, and sometimes it get fogs up. So you just have to take a little towel and wipe off the mirror. They understand that as opposed to a dialogue of something. But also getting involved with the young adult ministry and Rosie Hart, for example, out here. And just like, for example, I just came from NCYC, the National Catholic Youth Conference. I mean, this one was small, 3,000. I remember going with her because I've known her for 20 years to Indianapolis where there was 25,000 youth. And so now I'm kind of plugging back into that because as the other thing, I'm no longer a pastor, I'm an associate pastor.
Right.
And when you put an associate pastor who has, shall we say, ideas, and he's no longer in that seat, the energy has to go somewhere. So one of the things we're planning on is I'm going to do a parish-wide Kairos. I'm rewriting the manual so we can do it in the local area as opposed to Bishop. As a Catholic high school always puts on Kairos. I've told Rosie, I'm like, I think we need to do a parish community Kairos, just like maternity did with Patty Bailey. So I've got all the folders out and I'm going to rewrite it. So yeah, figure something to do.
That's all for this episode of Viatorian Voices. We'd like to thank Father Dan for his witness and service, and we pray for a smooth and joyful transition to his ministries in Las Vegas. Viatorian Voices Conversations on the Way is a production of Viatorian Vocation Ministry. The Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, together with women and men lay associates, who proclaim Jesus Christ and his gospel and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of Venerable Louis Querbes, and under the patronage of St. Viator, we strive to do everything well, so that through us Jesus may be adored and loved. This includes St. George Parish in Bourbonnais, Illinois, a Viatorian parish in the Diocese of Joliet, where Viatorians have lived and served in pastoral leadership since the 1890s. St. George is now led by Parish Administrator Father Patrick Render, and St. George has started a collaboration for youth ministry with neighboring Viatorian parish, Maternity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and its pastor, Father Jason Nesbitt. To learn more about the parish, visit stgeorgeil.com. That's stgeorgeil.com. Or check out St. George Church and Family Ministry on Facebook. To learn more about our community, visit viatorians.com or follow us on social media at Viatorian USA. Young adults seeking to connect with faith-filled peers can request to follow at ViatorianYA on the way on Instagram, where our young adult community is building new pathways for walking together in faith. Those seeking support and accompaniment in exploring God's invitations for them are invited to reach out to Vocation Ministry. Send us a DM on social media or email us to start a conversation. Remember, you can help us tell the Viatorian story by rating our podcast in your favorite app, sending this episode link to a friend, and praying for and encouraging young men considering Viatorian religious life. On behalf of Brother Peter and the Viatorian community, I'm Associate Dan Masterton. Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. St. Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.